deals historically have been on equity to get more black people into the sector. They have some specialist funds under them. They have a manufacturing fund, a furniture fund, a women's fund. There's a small enterprise development and finance agency, which was SIDA and SIFA. And then there's commercial banks. Commercial banks may not fund startups because usually it's expensive for them to fund it. They may not fund the developmental stuff that is done, but there certainly are certain transactions that they can fund. And then you have another tier of financial institutions who are, some of them registered credit providers, some of them are private equity, and now there's a new breed that does a lot of purchase order funding. So some of those entities structure it in a profit-sharing environment. So we have some of those entities here, like Sosfin, who are in that environment. There's IDF and many others. So we brought all of them physically for everyone to have this conversation with the funder. You go to the innovation agencies down there; they fund technology businesses, including fintech, which are sometimes at a conceptual stage and they need to be developed. There's the Gauteng Growth and Development Agency, which works with the Innovation Hub, which also incubates some of the startups in tech. So really what we're going to do from here is to continue to create these platforms where entrepreneurs and the funders can be in one room to create the engagement. Of course, as the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, we're here, and some of my colleagues, Aluwani, are here for any queries that you may have. But if there's anything about today, really why we created the platform was not so much to tell you about what we do and everything else. It was really for you to interact directly with the funders. But to come back to maybe questions which, you are entrepreneurs, you probably have answers into it, but let's assume you don't. How do you apply to these institutions? Most of them have physical offices, but almost all of them have online application processes. So in most occasions, even if you go to a SIFA office, a GEP office, an ITC office, they will eventually direct you to applying online. So the online applications will typically give you a reference number, and that's the reference number you will use when you follow up. So as a starting point, when you want to follow up, you must have applied. And when you apply, what is the criteria, which is often the other question we get a lot. What do these institutions fund? What are the limits? And. There is a compliance element, which is, if it's a national entity, typically then you can apply from any province. Provincial entities like Gauteng, your business should largely be based in Gauteng. But you also will have NEF, SIFA, ABSA, they have presence in Gauteng, so it doesn't matter, you can still apply to them. So there may be geographic limitations, but the basic over and above the admin, are you registered for tax, are you registered with CIPC, is going to be a proposal. The proposal is, you can call it an investment memorandum, you can call it a business plan, you can call it a business proposal. It will ask one of two things. So when you go to funders, and this is me, and I think the buyers, I've seen a few guys I know here, Bolwandiso, Jed, and others, but the worst thing you want to do, talking to a funder, is to say, what do you fund? When you go to a funder, it is better to go with, this is what I want, and they will tell you whether they can fund it or not. Because ultimately, let's say with us, we've brought the funders. If you come into GEP with something that's bigger than GEP's check, we have partnerships with the other funds, we can refer you to them. If it is something, let's say you want to buy property and ITC doesn't do it, they'll probably refer you to an entity that does it. So starting point is, be clear what it is that you want. And what you want will fall in one of two buckets. One, you need grants for some sort of business support or business development support. And that means you want to register with SABS and you need some subsidy for that. You want to have a business plan. You still want to do feasibility for your business. So if you're at that point where you've not started doing your business or you've been funding it out of your own pocket and you need to be organized, SEDFA, GEP, sometimes ITC, DBSA, they have what they call project prep. You can get money to do that. But if you come and say, I want debt, or I want you to, put equity in the business, at that point, you at least need to have a business plan that has financial models, because ultimately, whether it's debt or equity, there's got to be a return. If it is debt, you need to demonstrate that you can repay the money. If it is equity, you need to demonstrate that there's going to be a return for whatever that equity is. So even if it's a state-owned company like NEF or ITC that puts equity in the business, they may have a coupon rate that they want to get, or even if in the beginning they're not getting dividends, at some point when they exit, they want to get a return on their money. So that's the bottom line. You've got to have a business plan. There's no way around it. You can have as many meetings as you want, but if there's no document, it's not going to move very far. So often most of us who are in these institutions, when somebody says, I want money, the first question is, have you applied? If they have not applied, can you send the proposal? So that's the starting point. So if you're not ready and you don't have the proposal, maybe that's where you must start, get money so that you can get funded. On the broader, I think, questions for us as entrepreneurs, and maybe this is where I'm going to go and end. In about 2-3 weeks ago, we had in South Africa the chief economic advisor to the government of India. And he said something very interesting about business, the economy, and the challenges that we face. And his thesis is that the first industrial revolution, which basically brought capitalism as we see it today, of doing more with less, his belief is that it was largely driven by disease. In the UK, there was a pandemic that happened, a lot of people died, decimated the workforce, kind of forced businesses to consider capital investments which otherwise they wouldn't have done. It wasn't very viable, labor had now become expensive, and it then made these to be done. But he then says what that does is that we moved from a position of less and scarcity and a mentality of we've got to use the resources we have as efficiently as possible. But today, most of the developing world has a very different problem. And that different problem is that we have excess labor. Africa, I think we say more than 50% of the population is youth. In South Africa, a significant part of the population is youth. So we have excess labor for the labor market. And what that has done is that government often will say to entrepreneurs, when you do these proposals, how many jobs are you going to create, what's the impact? And I think that brings us sometimes into very difficult conversations. As a funder, I say, okay, if you come to me and say, I'll create 20 jobs. One, how do I verify it? Two, if now COVID happens, you can't afford those jobs, am I going to hold you into the 20 jobs or allow you to retrench until your business can afford those operating costs or not? So those are complicated questions we expect you as entrepreneurs to help us co-create solutions on, because ultimately if we don't, we get a lot of accusations on who actually gets this money from these entities. Is there an entrepreneur who's ever been funded? Do you guys do it? And yes, we do. I mean, there's billions that are spent by DFIs every year funding entrepreneurs. Some succeed and some don't succeed. But sometimes the ones that succeed don't create the scale that is needed to grow the economy. We're currently growing at about 1%. We know that to create the income government needs for redistribution, but also for businesses to start growing, we should be growing at about 5% as an economy. And a lot of it is going to depend on us as entrepreneurs. I mean, I've been in business on my own on the side of raising money or lending money. We started a stock exchange at some point, and the business didn't succeed. We had to fold it. COVID impacted a little bit on that. So many people in this room who either want to start businesses or have started businesses know the hardships that come with it. But we need a lot of innovation on how do we solve problems of the country. Health has become a little bit expensive. Education is expensive. Those of you who have kids in private schools will know how much that is. So we need a hybrid of a public sector system that works, private institutions which are closer to where people are and are affordable, healthcare system that is affordable, road networks that work, water infrastructure, off-the-grid solutions either on water, sewage and electricity, because that's what's going to enable business and allow us to grow. We can look at Eskom, Transnet as the main ones that are going to drive the investments, but we also know government doesn't have the money required for it. I mean, our investment as a percentage of GDP now is at about 15% as a country, and we need it at about 25%, and that 10% gap is about $40 billion. So that's a lot of money that we know our GDP can't carry from a government spending point of view. The other investments have to come to the private sector. So there's a lot of partnerships we're doing, and the partners, as I said, we brought them here like SME, IDF, SOSFIN, ABSA, FNB, and many of the other banks and financial institutions which are in the province, so that you can see that there is a bigger pool of funds that we can do. So I'll end there, Muzi, and thank everyone for coming, but utilize the opportunity to go downstairs and have the actual conversations with the funders. As I said, we have the colleagues here. I think after the panel, Muzi, maybe we'll have them so that they can point people to where they need to be, and that if there's follow-up questions, we can have them. So thank you. Have a great day.
I'm going to make a few assumptions this morning, and I'll ask those assumptions, and you can tell me if I'm correct or wrong. Given the remarks that we have heard, we all understand why SMMEs matter, correct? Do we understand why SMMEs matter? Yes. Perfect. Given the remarks made by the board chair and the CEO, I assume we appreciate that there's a funding cap, correct? Hey, for people who want money, the room is it's a bit cool. Maybe should I ask the question? We appreciate that there's a funding cap, correct? Yes. So we are in the right room at the right place at the right time, right? Okay. And I think in order for us to proceed on how we can better understand as entrepreneurs, as investors, as well as people who fund, I think it's important to have a conversation about it, the good old local way in which we do things with dialogue. Just one assumption, I assume we all know who I am, right? No, probably not. My name is Muzi Matema. I'm the Group Executive for Research at the Gauteng Growth and Development Agency. I will be the moderator of today's panel. And today's panel, as I highlighted earlier, is largely focused on how we bridge the funding gap between SMMEs and the various funding institutions. As the CEO was speaking, I was reflecting on the fact that if there's one thing that the crisis of COVID-19 proved to us globally, is that money can always be found when there's a crisis. And if we all agree that the funding gap is a crisis, and there's people in this room that have that money, so money can surely be found. So in today's conversation, I would just like to call upon the panelists that will be joining me. But before I do that, I just want to give some housekeeping rules. I'll call upon the panelists and I'll ask each of them one extremely difficult question. They will then respond. And if you're not satisfied with that question, I will give you as the audience, as the people who need funding, a Q&A to grill them further, right? Aniti, there's a funding cap. We need money, right? Okay, so let's jump straight into it. My panelists this morning, Mr. Lwandiso Makupula, who's the head of investments at SIDFA. Lwandiso, if you can come on stage, please. Mr. Thais Tekela. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Theistekela, Development Specialist at Absa Bank. You won't miss him because he's wearing an Absa branded outfit. Please clap for him as he comes on stage too. Miss Itumele Nglamini, Program Manager, SAB Foundation, responsible for alternative financing models. Welcome, ma'am. Mr. Jed Harris, Chief Strategy Officer at SOSFIN. You can sit, some can sit beside panelists. I won't bite, I promise. I believe these are all the panelists we have today. Oh, Miss Lesiba Matladi, Senior Manager, Enterprise Supply Development, Standard Bank. I apologize. Welcome, panelists.
Looks like there's a thumbs up at the back, but I'm not sure.
Am I audible?
Have you turned it on?
Am I audible?
Yeah, it's on.
Am I audible? I think it's not yet on, is it?
Sounds good.
Sounds good. I think I'm audible now. Thank you. Panelists, I think just the rules of engagement. You'll introduce what your business does and how it assists SMMEs in bridging the funding gap. And you'll do that after the question I've asked. So I'll ask a question and then you say, look, this is what our business does and this is how you will respond to the question. And I'll start with ladies first. On my far left, Ms. Itumele Nglamini, welcome to the panel. In introducing yourself as well as the work that SAB does in assisting, I think I would like you to reflect on the following. Beyond the traditional bank loans, what alternative finance mechanisms, such as the work that SAB does, have you identified and how does it help bridge the gap that exists beyond the traditional banking loans and the work that Gauteng Enterprise Propeller does?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to share what the SAB Foundation does. Before I respond to your question, I just want to acknowledge the entrepreneurs in the room, right? Where are you, my entrepreneurs? I don't think the work that entrepreneurs do is celebrated enough, right? Because SMMEs are the economic engine of this economy. You drive development, and your role is very significant. Unfortunately, you don't get the right kind of support to get you where you need to get in order to create the much-needed jobs. And you don't get celebrated for the hard work that you do because the entrepreneurial journey is very difficult. I sit here because I ran a business that failed, and so I know how difficult it is. And I took the other path, which I think I'm better suited for, in supporting you and your needs and making sure that businesses move forward in this country. So I want to celebrate you and the hard work that you do. Congratulations to you. So the SAB Foundation, we are the BEE Trust of South African breweries. We were established in 2010. And our mandate is to empower the underserved populations in our country through entrepreneurship development. By underserved, it means that we prioritize women, youth, people with disabilities, as well as people in rural areas. Now, that doesn't mean that if you are older or you are operating maybe in a township that we would discount and you wouldn't qualify. So there is a role that you can play, and we do fund and support, people my age who are way beyond the youth age, but we do prioritize those population groups. And so we invest in social innovation, and I'm glad that our speaker who presented here initially really spoke about we really need to look at what are some of the challenges that are facing society that we can solve for. So it's not necessarily about, I'm starting a catering company, or it's about how do I contribute to society in a more meaningful way, and how do I innovate to drive or solve some of those issues that society is facing. And those are the kind of businesses that we're looking for, that we fund, and we fund them initially through grants. So we are one of few corporate foundations that invest at an early stage. So we support startup businesses, right? And we provide grants, which I think are very important. And I'm glad the panel is diverse and they can talk about the other instruments. But for us, grants are very critical in really enabling you to test the concept in the market, to ensure that there is that product market fit, to ensure that you're getting the right kind of compliance and getting started, in order to then, once you meet that specific threshold, that you can then go to other investors in the space, because now you've tested the model, you know that it works, you've got evidence to back it up, and it makes it easier to have the kind of conversations that your follow-on investors would want to have, because you have gone through that initial process, and we would have funded you and supported you. Another critical thing that I want to mention here is that our funding is program-based. I know some of you sitting in the room are probably tired of going through an incubation program, right? You're like, now I have to go through another, skills, and I think it's very critical, especially for early stage businesses, and that's what we provide. So through the SAB Foundation, you apply to be part of a program for targeted at early stage businesses. We provide business skills training, mentorship, which is very, very critical, especially at an early stage, and then the grant funding to kind of support some of those ideas that you have. Then when you're ready to go on to the next level, we either would then facilitate some kind of engagement with follow-on funders, but we also have other funding mechanisms within the foundation that are available to businesses that have been through our programs and our pipeline. So I'm going to stop there and let the other panelists add.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Ms. Lamine. And I think for me, the key theme of what you said is the role that your entity plays in de-risking the work or the work that the entrepreneurs need to take on. Which leads me to my next question to you, Lwandile. SMMEs often struggle to secure funding due to perceived risk, lack of collateral, and financial literacy. The list is endless. What immediate policy challenges and structural changes do you believe can help bridge the funding gap on SMMEs in South Africa?
Thanks, Musa. Maybe let's start with the work that you guys are doing. GP, this is commendable. We need these initiatives. Well done. But I think we need
Wait, can I ask the audience to clap on that one?
I think we need to do more of these. That's number one. Number two, to bring these parties together. We're working in silos, and it's not helping anyone. It's not helping us, it's not helping the targeted market, it's not helping anyone. So well done once more. I come from SEDFA. We are the only organization that we don't even need to think or to ask, what do we do? We are a small enterprise development and finance agency. We proudly so. We are for SMEs in every respect. We fund SMEs, but before we fund SMEs, we develop them. we give what we normally call a pre-investment as well as post-investment support. So we don't just give our funding. If you are not ready for funding, we ensure that we bring you to readiness by giving you the pre-investment support. Then we fund you. Post that, we know that the road can be lonely. We don't make you walk alone. We walk with you. So there is a post-investment support. I think Uzamxaka has indicated at the beginning that we used to be CEDA and CIFA. Now everything is under one roof. We used to give development on one side and finance on the other side. Everything now is in one roof. On the question that you are asking, Muzi, as CIFA, we believe SMEs are always going to be risky. So if you don't fund SMEs due to risk, then get out of the kitchen. You're not fit to be there. We know that SMEs are going to be risky. We know that SMEs don't have the collateral. What do we do as CIFA? As CIFA, we are giving 3 financial instruments. We are practicing what I would call a fair discrimination. The small ones who cannot afford the business, who cannot afford the loan, who cannot afford the full funding, we give them a grant. A case in point right now, we are busy assessing guys that applied for asset assist. Asset assist is for the micro businesses. One needs tools of trade, fridge here, a stove here. We're giving a maximum of 250,000 grant to each. So we have grant, even the cooperatives, we give grant a maximum of 2.5 million. But when you go up, we start to blend. We have a mix of a grant and the loan. And when you go higher, we give you a loan. And our loan is still very reasonable. In what way? We give you payment holiday. We give you lower interest rates. But there are things then that needs to happen, Muzi, in the market or structurally. We need more partnerships so that there could be a risk sharing. We need some tax reforms, I would say. For the guys who are doing venture capital, there should be tax incentives. We need to relook at the BE codes of good governance. I'm talking now as a country. The BE codes of good governance are all about blackness. They are not about SMEs. So we need to relook into that. It must not just be about black. It must be about black and SMEs. SMEs are very important. A case in point, if you go to Germany, I think about 70% of the GDP is coming from SMEs. And about 70% of jobs in Germany are coming from SMEs. You come to South Africa, I think SMEs, they contribute about 28% to the GDP. Certainly we can do more. So again, changing the how we do a business. We have something we call guarantees at CIFA. We call it Kula Credit Guarantee. So we go to SOSFIN. SOSFIN fund these clients that you would not normally fund owing to risk, owing to collateral, or whatever. We stand guarantee. We need more of that product. We have it at CIFA. Are we having enough money for it? And the answer is no. And I think that should be promoted by government as stop the most. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. The last two speakers are not from traditional banks, and they reflected on some of the work that they do to make sure SMMEs and entrepreneurs are funded or fundable. And I think which prepares the path for you to come on board And my question to you will be as follows. Traditional banks often hesitate, at least there's a perception that traditional banks hesitate to fund SMMEs due to credit worthiness concerns, bankability concerns. Maybe given your expertise, how can banks innovate their lending models to better serve SMMEs while managing these risks effectively? And I say this being very cognizant that banks operate within a very strict risk framework.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not sure if I'm audible.
Is he audible? Technical, please assist. Check now.
Check. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stacey Keller. I'm from ABSA Enterprise Development. So I'm going to tell you a little bit brief about what we do, and then I'll go to the question. So from our side, what we do, we mainly focus on three things. Firstly, we focus on access to finance. This is where we design programs in order for us to make sure that SMEs that wouldn't necessarily qualify under traditional channels, they qualify. So we come up with innovative ways in order for us to make them qualify. Number two, we also focus on access to markets. On access to markets, we are saying once we have funded an SME, we don't want an SME to only focus on one client. What do we do in order for us to help them grow their business? So what we do, we introduce them to other potential buyers of their products. One of our flagship program that we do, it's called Smart Procurement, which we do every year. In that program, what we do, we bring all the big corporates in one room, and then we also bring our SMEs, so that our SMEs can interact with those corporates. So those corporates, what we do, we bring their procurement personnel. So in that room, you are able to engage with them directly in terms of getting to know how is it to get into their supply chain, and you also get to understand the opportunities that are there from those corporates. And then lastly, we also do what is called non-financial support or business development support. Under business development support, this is where we provide education, or we provide mentorship to our clients to better manage their business, because of, as we all know, entrepreneurs, mostly when they start, they fail. So the reason they fail is because of there's a lack of support. Sometimes that support can be technical. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. Going back to your question. So traditionally, funders are looking for someone who has already built a business where there's track record. In that way, it's easy for a traditional bank to fund. But if you are a startup, it's quite tricky to fund. It's not doable, but it's quite tricky. So I think what we need to focus on is focus on pre-investment. I think most of the people, when they start their business, they jump to execution, they jump to going and applying for that tender. And once that they've obtained that tender, only then they go back in terms of checking who can fund me. And I think what we need to change is that if you're going to be starting a business, you need to understand who are the different funders in the market, because of in the market, there's different funders and they all have different mandates. If you've got an idea, you need to understand who's likely to fund you and what are the requirements. Because of if you are looking for funding, before you even start, it costs nothing going to a bank and asking them, I'm in this direction. Should I get a tender? Are you able to fund me? And if you're able to fund me, what are the requirements? It costs nothing. We always wait to get a tender, and then you have to submit in today's time, and then you are going to a bank looking for funding. So I think if we can invest in that pre-investment and making sure that our entrepreneurs, they understand what banks are looking for, I think that can make most of the entrepreneurs being fundable. So at ABSA, what we have done, we have come up with programs, especially for women and youth. The program for women is called She Thrive. The one for youth is called Emerging Entrepreneur. The reason why we have developed those programs is basically to to answer the question of providing pre-funding support to our SMEs. So immediately when you become our client, you get access to master classes that are going to engage you on be funding ready, so that by the time you are ready for funding, at least you understand the basic requirements of taking up that loan. And then what we have also done for our entrepreneurs, when you open an account with ABSA, we give you a 6 months where you're not paying any transactional fees. And then another thing that is also nice about it, our clients can qualify up to 5 million loan without asking any collateral. The reason we're doing that is because we understand that they don't have collateral because of their startup. Also, they don't have any track record, they don't have any balance sheet. So it's going to be difficult for them to provide the bank with any collateral. Hence we are saying up to 5 million, they qualify without the bank asking for any collateral. Yeah,
okay.
Let me stop there.
I think your last statement triggered the audience quite positively, and I'm quite excited to see what the audience will ask when the turn comes. But just to reflect what we've discussed so far, we've discussed on de-risking entrepreneurs, we've discussed on enterprise development, we've then discussed on how do we then make sure they become funding ready from ABSA. I just want to take it to the next step and ask Standard Bank to come in here. Lesiba, someone has been de-risked, enterprise development, has gone through all the funding preparedness. They are now a client of Standard Bank. My question is, often from a research perspective, we hear that SMMEs then become stagnant in that position of, I received this funding, this is where my business is now stuck. What structured financial models do you have as Standard Bank that then can assist the SMMEs to transition into MMMEs and eventually large corporates? And we ask this from this point. In countries where the SMME model has been successful, they've been able to show case studies that someone started off in a garage, now they're $1 billion corporation. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a very important question, right? So let me first start by saying, at Standard Bank Enterprise and Supply Development, our main goal is to actually enable SMEs to grow into sustainable enterprise. So exactly your question. So how do we enable you to start, manage your business, and then grow it and scale it into a large enterprise? And how we do that is through three folds. So that enablement of access to finance, which is various finance mechanism. The grant component does come in. We do have purchase order funding, and then also we do support in certain instances with guarantee if it's aligned to certain corporates. Further to that, we then have the access to market component, which speaks to your question right now. So that says, how do we link you with large corporates to enable your business to get those opportunities? And you're very much right to say that SMEs, often after getting that funding and also that development program, which they hop from one to the other. They will hop from a Standard Bank to an ABSA one to an SAB one, and we're seeing them across, right? So how do you then grow out of the enterprise and supply development programs and start generating business from these corporates? So the very same entities that offer the development programs are also, they do have a supply chain. They procure, they've got commodities that they procure. So you need to start asking those questions around, how do I get onto your procurement system and start supplying you, right? So often enough, we find that there's a gap around that component, the training of how do I put together a proposal and go and pitch it to a prospective client, which is either a large corporate, right? So at Standard Bank, we do enable that linkage. We speak to various corporates. We formed relationships with corporates where we would then open up those opportunities. Even within our own procurement system, we're then able to link you up with opportunities that arises. Further to that, we've got business development service providers that do the hand-holding for our suppliers. So as I said, it's an enterprise and supplier development. So once you become part of our procurement system, how do we make sure that you can actually deliver on that contract that you've secured with Standard Bank or with the corporate partners that we have, right? So there is business development service providers that will do the training, the coaching. They'll look at gaps into your business to say, is there a marketing gap? Is there HR gap? Is there, are the employees professional enough to, sort of handle your business and sell your business, etc.? So those are some of the mechanisms that we do. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. Mr. Harris, you're last on the panel. And I know you represent a much more exotic technology-driven way of funding. So I'll jump straight in it. Looking at what we've heard today, I'd like you to reflect on the role that private investors and entities such as yourself play in SMME funding, and what you think can be done to attract more entities such as yours to play a role in mobilizing capital towards SMMEs.
Perfect. Can you hear me? There we go. So firstly, just to the Deputy Chair and to the CEO of GEP, to Muzi, thanks very much for having us. Nozipho, nice to see you again. It's been great. SourceFin has been a proud partner and collaborator with the GEP for the past 2 years. In 2023, we signed a memorandum of incorporation to support each other on a variety of things, for funding, for knowledge sharing, as well as skills development for the SMMEs. It's wonderful being joined by panelists. There was an amazing point that Saki made in his address. He spoke about the funding gap. And I remember it reminded me 2 years ago when Ms. Tuli Manzini, the Director General of the Department of Small Business, she spoke at the GEP announcement, and she addressed the funding gap. And at the time, I think it was the same number that Mr. Zamkaka also mentioned. I think it was the $30 billion. And we've seen a few of those variations. 300 billion rand is the one that we've seen. But what I really liked about what Saki said a little bit earlier is it's not one organization that's going to close that gap. It's going to take commitment and collaboration and strategic partnerships with organizations such as yourselves, with SMMEs in the audience, as well as government-driven enterprises like the GEP to foster the closure of that funding gap. So in short, to the question, and I suppose in doing so I'm going to introduce SourceFin and what SourceFin does. So to the question is going to be innovative business and operating models. And SourceFin, when we set out, we started in 2020 in the midst of COVID, and to date we've deployed just under 2 billion rand to just short of 1,000 SMMEs. And we set out on a goal. We set out on a goal to support SMMEs deliver on their promise and to help them grow. And we're very proud of what we have achieved, and we've still got a lot more to do. But in true SourceFin style, I'm going to try and, I don't know if the mic's gone.
I think they've lost it. Our sound
Technical?
is gone.
Testing.
I don't need my
Testing? Yeah. Perfect. So in true SourceFin style, I'd like to explain a little bit of what I mean by business model and operating model, which are going to help close the business gap. And that's going to be supported by companies, alternative funders like SourceFin. So we offer two products, purchase order funding and invoice discounting. And I haven't chatted to Muzi about it, but I'm going to use Muzi as an example. So let's assume Muzi gets a purchase order from the city of Johannesburg to deliver 1 million water bottles. Right? Muzi's just started his business. He's 6 months old. He doesn't really have much of a track record. He might have had a personal judgment. I'm sure you don't, but you might have had a personal judgment. He might owe some money to SARS. And, brought up in a traditional financial system, he's probably going to start out with a traditional lender, so a bank. And the bank might be very risk averse. They might say, Muzi, we love what you're doing. We see the opportunity, but unfortunately our mandate doesn't allow for us to support you at this point. What SourceFin has done Perfect. So what Sourcefin has done is we've created a business model called open-minded funding. So what that is we look to the future, not to the past. So we don't look at the credit worthiness, we look at the size of the opportunity. And in Muzi's case, the size of the opportunity is the purchase order that he or she has received from the city of Johannesburg. Now, Muzi will approach Sourcefin. Sourcefin will look at the purchase order. Obviously, it's a legitimate one, and we're happy to fund it. Where we do things slightly differently is we'll support Muzi with his SARS shortfall. We might bake it into the price of the loan. We'll look at the judgments, and we're not going to use that as a method to disqualify. We're going to use that as a method to build a partnership and a relationship and understand what trials and tribulations Muzi has gone through in his business. What's more, and what's very powerful about Sourcefin's business model is Muzi might come to us with a quote from a Quelle or Valpre and says, Jed, this is, or Sourcefin, this is the supply quote, please can you fund based on it? So let's assume Muzi comes in with a purchase order of R1 million. We have a supply quote from Muzi for 900,000 Rand. Where Sourcefin is different, and it's in our name, the secret sauce, we have a supply chain of over 2,000 pre-vetted suppliers, both locally and internationally. We are going to send Muzi's RFQ to that pool of suppliers, and what's going to happen is we're probably going to get a discount on that amount. So Muzi's going to come to us expecting a profit of 100,000 on that purchase order. We might source the water bottles for an additional 200,000 Rand less, which will give Muzi an additional 200,000 Rand profit. So that 300,000 Rand profit is going to offset the interest rate charged by Sourcefin, and it's going to allow Muzi with additional cash flow to grow his business. And that's just an example of our approach. So that operating model, that business model, we're not looking at the history of Muzi, we're looking at the future. And I think there's a range of alternative funders that have entered the market, all with a similar approach, looking towards the future, not looking backwards. And I think that's vital to bridging that funding gap.
Thank you for that, Jared. And it leads me to my next question. This is a question to all panelists. I think we've all here have an appreciation of what you do, the role that you play, and we're grateful for it. But I want to introduce you to someone, panelists, and I need you to pay attention because each of you will be asked questions based on this virtual person. Nhlanhla is a 34-year-old entrepreneur from Soweto. He runs a small but growing business, a food business. This business is called Kasi Treats. He started with a single food trailer and has gained loyal customer base. His dream is to scale by adding 2 more trailers, eventually opening a Chisanyama. These are Nhlanhla's attributes. Nhlanhla is limited capital. He needs 500,000 to expand, but is rejected by banks. Nhlanhla has cash flow constraints. His revenue is inconsistent, making it difficult to prove his credit worthiness. Nhlanhla has no formal records. He has no audited financial statements, and he often operates with cash. High competition, naba fana laba who want to roll out a Kasi business. Regulatory barriers, he struggles with securing payments, compliance, and health issues. Now, my scenario-based questions to each of the panelists based on what you said your entities do. Luandi, I'll start with you from SIDFA. Nhlanhla is denied funding from traditional banks because he lacks formal records and collateral. How does SIDFA assist Nhlanhla?
Nhlanhla is coming from Ekasi. At SETFA, we have a program. We call it Township and Rural Entrepreneurship Program. So we are funding entrepreneurs, but these entrepreneurs should be coming from townships or rural areas. And the whole point is about township economy, and the whole point is about rural development and rural economy. Up to a maximum of $1 million, we fund these entrepreneurs. The cap is $1 million. But the first 50% of that is a grant limited to 100,000. Let me start again, or let me give a scenario. If Nhlanhla is looking for 50,000, 25,000 is a grant and another 25,000 is a loan. Our loan is just at 5% flat. You don't get that anywhere. Now, if Nhlanhla is looking for 200,000, we're gonna give Nhlanhla 100,000, which is 50% is a grant and another 50% is a loan at 5%. However, if Nhlanhla needs more than 200,000, our grant does not exceed 100,000. So if Nhlanhla in this case is looking for 500,000, the first 100,000 will be a grant and the next 400,000 to Nhlanhla will be a loan. It's a sweet loan, it's at 5%. And we're here for him and many other Nhlanhlas who want to do businesses in townships or rural areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. This Nhlanhla approaches ABSA seeking for a loan, but remember Nhlanhla has no audited financials or formal credit history. What alternative assessment methods can ABSA provide to Nhlanhla to assist in measuring his creditworthiness?
Yeah, so firstly, we will encourage Nhlanhla to also use technology in his business. Because I think I heard you saying Nhlanhla is operating very manually. Because of, remember, there's also a drive by government to decash the economy. So there's a lot of technology platforms that Nhlanhla can use. So some of the technology can also actually help Nhlanhla to do QuickBooks in the background while Nhlanhla is transacting. At ABSA, we also offer what is called cash flow manager. As we are transacting in the account, in the background, the system is also doing books that when you come to the bank looking for funding, remember now Nhlanhla does not have an accountant or can't afford an accountant. We can use the very same cash flow manager system because of it will generate income statement and a balance sheet. It will then give us detailed information in terms of his business so that we can do a proper assessment. So that I will advise firstly for Nhlanhla to do. And then when it comes to funding, so from our side, even if you don't have financial statements, especially a young entrepreneur, we are still able to fund as long as we can rely on the strength of the projections of the business. We are still able to fund. Even if he doesn't have collateral, we'll still be in a position to fund Nhlanhla.
Okay, thank you. Itumeleng, and this is where you come in. Given Nhlanhla's scenario, we all appreciate Nhlanhla has a strong community support, but clearly Nhlanhla has no financial backing at this stage. Would he be a good candidate for some of the alternative funding models, such as grant funding and impact investment work that you do at SAP?
Yeah, definitely Nhlanhla would be the right candidate and eligible to apply for initially the grant funding that we provide. The one thing that I think we would really want to unpack with Nhlanhla is really doing a diagnostic assessment to figure out, what are the gaps within this business model, right? Because Nhlanhla may not even necessarily need 500,000. We don't know if, how justifiable this 500,000 is, right? So we would have to look under the hood to look at, what does the business model look like? Where are the gaps? So you don't want to also invest in a dark hole where you're putting in money, but you're not seeing any kind of results. So we would do initially that diagnostic, and then depending on what the challenges have been identified, we would then match Nhlanhla with the right kind of mentor to support him and guide him in working on this business model. On top of that, we would pair him with any kind of technical mentors, either people working in the space, to assess, is this a real growth opportunity, and then prepare him to be able to access that opportunity. We initially, when you start with us, the program that you would apply for is the Tulwana Enterprise Program, and that's the program that we're well known for as a foundation. And interestingly, people don't actually, when they exit the program, they don't really talk about the finance that they receive. They are really excited and are more appreciative of the mentorship, the technical support, the market readiness, and the market access that that program provides over and above the funding. And so sometimes we're very quick to rush to, I need a certain amount of money, without actually looking at, examining what the real issues are in the business before we start looking for that funding. And then in terms of the financial records, the one critical part that we play in terms of getting businesses' investment ready is really working on record keeping. So this is something that I think as an early stage business, as a startup business, you don't really pay attention to, because you're like, well, I'm not making a lot of sales, I'm not doing this, and so you neglect that part. But being able to demonstrate that history, for us, when you apply, it's not really about penalizing the fact that you're not making money, but we just want to see the historical evidence in terms of, you have some money coming in, and then you're spending it on this, and then, maybe this month it's not a lot, and the next month. It's just really to look at that activity. It's not to penalize you and say you're not making money and therefore we won't support you. So our approach is very much developmental. We want to work closely with you to make sure that that model is not a leaky bucket, that you're not just throwing money in a dark hole, but that you fix that. And also you're working on your record management, you're really improving your financial literacy, which we're seeing is a barrier to accessing bigger pots of funding. And so making sure that those records are kept and that you're able to demonstrate where and how the financing is being spent. And then I think when we're done with Tlantla, right, in a year or so, we are confident that we can hand Tlantla over to an investor who's able to provide a significant amount of funding, because now they've got the records to prove it, and they've sorted out their business model, and then it works, and that they're able to demonstrate that there is a real market opportunity in terms of expansion.
Thank you for that, and I like how you finished that, because it leads to my next question. It's been a year. Tlantla has received funding from SAP, from SEEDFA, ABSA has done its thing. What would you recommend to Tlantla when it comes to the door of Standard Bank? And what advice would you give him and support would you give him to ensure sustainable growth and avoid over-indebtedness?
Yeah, so perfect. I think as Itumile had mentioned, that diagnosis, you say, where are you at this stage? So we need to just look at what was the impact of that investment that SAP had made into your business. How have you managed to actually grow that business, your business, with the investment that you got? And is there a potential for further growth? Is the business sustainable, etc.? I wanted to touch on one element that my colleagues didn't touch on, which was the compliance element, which you mentioned. So looking at township businesses and the compliance gap that we keep on hearing, right? Tlantla is running a food truck. So I would assume that part of those programs, they would have looked at, firstly, how do we get Tlantla to become compliant, because that's important. That's very important, right? So now we are a year later, you've received the funding, invested it into your business, and you have grown. There's cash flows, there's track record in terms of your banking statement. There are various mechanisms that we can give you. So if you say, look, I'm looking to scale, and I now don't know where else, we'll help you through our business development service providers, and also part of our programs that we have to try and see where else is the opportunity for you to actually grow, and also support you in terms of that growth journey. There's obviously, we are a commercial bank, and a year later you are now funding ready, right? So all the interventions that were done from an enterprise and supply development perspective was to get you funding ready. At some point, entrepreneurs need to realize that we need to move out of enterprise and supply development and go into normal commercial lending. And there's various mechanisms that we can provide support with from a Standard Bank perspective. But we don't leave you there. If you come back and say, look, I am still struggling and I need some form of intervention, we'll use our service providers to sort of support you with the development gaps that you have.
Thank you so much. Jed, the next question. Tlantla has gone through SAP, has gone to ABSA, Standard Bank, and all of them have successfully assisted him. It's now 2 years since Nhlanhla came to the Gauteng Investment Conference, Gauteng Funding Symposium. Nhlanhla wants to partner with a large retail chain or corporate catering business. What does SOSFIN do to assist Nhlanhla?
So firstly, Nhlanhla sounds like an amazing entrepreneur, and I'm sure represents a lot of the entrepreneurs in the audience. What I like about this example is it shows the teamwork and the collaboration that's required in the life cycle of an SMME or the life cycle of an entrepreneur. So starting from zero, there's the ESD support, there's the grant support, there's the startup funding support. You know, with alternative funding, so as I mentioned a bit earlier, SourceFin offers purchase order funding and invoice discounting. So what we would need from Nhlanhla is obviously a purchase order or an invoice to fund. And because he's gone through this growth journey with the colleagues on the stage, I think he's ready. And I think you said he's looking to expand into larger retailers. And I'm also assuming that he's starting to do some events. He's looking at some of the tenders that are being launched, and he's seen there's some events that he can cater for, and he's ready to start bidding on those. The problem is, Nhlanhla probably has his money tied up, probably doesn't have a lot of cash flow, and for him to commit to large retailers, because obviously he needs to purchase the stock up front and send it to the retailers, or if he wants to cater, he would need to purchase the material and the labor up front before he's able to cater. But unfortunately, it's all tied up. He doesn't have any money or any cash flow. And in some of the tender requirements, there is proof of financial support that is required. So what I would advise Nhlanhla to do is, if he's found that tender or if he's found that purchase order opportunity, approach SourceFin. So we offer as a free service a letter of support to any SMME that's looking to bid on tenders, looking to bid on purchase orders. What that includes is a letter from SourceFin advising that should this tender or should this purchase order be awarded to the SMME, SourceFin will be the funder supporting with delivery of that service. And that would be step number one. Step number two is, let's assume Nhlanhla has bid on the tender, he's won a catering company, or he's won a catering tender, or he's partnered with a big retailer. He's going to get purchase orders from those retailers. Those purchase orders are powerful documents, because a purchase order and an invoice to SourceFin is a temporary document which is going to eventually turn into money. And that's going to be the security that allows SourceFin to fund that purchase order or that invoice. So a purchase order, remember, is a formal binding commitment that I will pay you for the services you render, provided that you deliver those services I've requested. So Nhlanhla receiving a purchase order or Nhlanhla delivering and receiving an invoice is a powerful way to apply for funding, even if he doesn't have the security, even if he doesn't have the track record, even if he doesn't have the financial history. Because SourceFin, we look forward. We see the invoice, we see the PO, we see the power of the opportunity, and we will support Nhlanhla with that opportunity to deliver that first one. And once that first one's delivered, there's going to be momentum created. The tender industry is going to see Nhlanhla delivered on the first, he's very likely to deliver on the next, or the retailer might turn from one retailer to another retailer. The problem for Nhlanhla is cash flow is going to become even more of a concern, because now he's got 4 or 5 catering agencies that he needs to bid for, and he's got a couple of retailers that he needs to purchase stock for. The nice thing for Nhlanhla is with all of those opportunities come a purchase order, and with a purchase order, SourceFin's able to fund those purchase orders and grow his business from deal 1 to deal 3 to deal 10 to deal 20. And that's how you grow a sustainable business. And what's nice with SourceFin is you receive more than just the funding. We walk with Nhlanhla, we partner with him for growth. We hold his hand through the process. Logistics support, project management support, end-buy support, introduction to suppliers. There's an example of a client we supported where they received a purchase order for industrial washing machines, and the only supplier was in Germany. The problem for the entrepreneur, he was a great engineer, but he didn't see in the contract that he wasn't protected against interest rate or exchange rate risk. And at the time of his deal, the Ukraine-Russia war broke out, and all of a sudden the exchange rate was very unfavorable towards him. if Sourcefin hadn't supported, if our legal team hadn't reviewed those documents, the entrepreneur, Nhlanhla, maybe in this case, would have actually lost money at the end because he didn't take into account the risks within the transaction. And those are the value-added services we can support a thriving entrepreneur like Nhlanhla.
Panelists, thank you so much. I think I have exhausted the limit of my curiosity. But because we have to close at 11, I would like to take 3 questions from the audience. I see I've got more than 3 questions, but just to assist the process to the audience and to give you assurance, all the funders that are represented here have got exhibition stands downstairs, so you can ask them with critical questions. So should you not happen to be one of the 3, please visit their stands for more information. I don't know if someone can assist with giving the microphone to the audience. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, please choose 3, ma'am. There's a lady with a microphone at the back. Yes, you have the privilege to choose the 3, ma'am.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for being the chosen one. My name is Ruby. I run an events and conference planning company. And this might sound old cliche, but our reality is that COVID has hit a lot of us really hard. And we have lost quite a bit of momentum as well due to that, and trying to come back again has been quite a huge struggle, but we're trying to make it by being innovative in our ways of running our businesses. My question to all of you guys is, for some of us, especially myself, I've found that I've had to pivot because of the way that my business was affected, my finances and everything that was building up quite nicely, but then, found itself in a terrible dump. My pivot for me means that I needed to look at a different business that I've never even thought that I would be doing. To me, it is new because I've never ventured in that. So are you looking at it as a startup when you look at me? Am I going to be penalized because of all the drama that I've been through that has been unforeseen? And the type of business is the type of business that has its own background and its own financial blessings, if I can use the word, because it is a franchise business. Being a franchise business, is it a startup in your view? Am I able to be forgiven for the things that have happened in the past? What are my options? Thank you.
Second last question.
Good morning. My name is Peter Mapige. My question would go to Sourcefin and SEDFA. Because we all know the commercial banks really in South Africa, they are not really helping, especially to SMME startups. So for Sourcefin, I didn't hear Mr. Jed Harris talk about exactly, what is the percent of the profit sharing. I, in the past, had an opportunity to interact with Sourcefin, but they told me that my profit margin was too thin. So I just want him to, elaborate on exactly, the percentage of profit sharing. And then to SEDFA, these guys, I must say, they are the most suited, for SME funding, but I don't know, is it the amalgamation process recently, but they've been very much, inaccessible. I don't know, is it systems or, just the process of this amalgamation, but I would just want to ask him in terms of the grants, is this completely, just a grant, and when with no, attachments or, if I may say, any legalities, to repay back, because I think as startups or SMEs, we struggle with small things like tools of trade, and just, transport costs to go there and there and there. So I just want him to touch on the grants, how accessible are the grants? Thank you.
And the last question?
Thank you. Sorry, guys in the front. We try. We'll try to speak for you guys. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lebogang Rantau. I'm the founder of Ngoma app, which is a mobile app that helps people find and consult virtually with traditional and spiritual healers, as well as purchase traditional and spiritual goods online. My question, one, is to Mr. Sitfa, kind of in line with Ubuti's question here, and that is, when will the asset assist results come back? Number one. I applied, so I would love to know feedback or timelines on that. And then number two is to the banks mainly. In terms of your guys' ESD programs and your ESD initiatives, actually let me chime in SAB as well. But I know SAB is quite intricate in their implementation. To the banks, for your implementation partners, do you guys set the mandate of how they actually implement the ESD you provide to them? And do you think that it would be more helpful to SMEs and startups to actually provide business support alongside grant funding during the business support? Because at the end of the day, for a business to operate, if the owner is gone for business support training 3 or 4 days in a week, the business still needs to run. To be able to generate cash flow, you need cash. So would banks look at a model like that where they introduce your business development support, which is key, but as well with grant funding to actually help the business grow while the owner is growing as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Panelists, there you have it, 3 questions. But before you answer, I need to assure my audience. We have got over 50 funders represented at this funding symposium. We currently just have 5 on stage. After this panel, you can interact with these. But for your questions, I assure you, the 50 funders that we've procured will be very, very helpful as well. But in the interest of time, and I see I'm receiving death threats, in the interest of time, panelists, those are the 3 questions from the floor.
Okay.
Any takers?
I can try to answer the first question from the lady over there. So we don't regard a franchise as a startup because remember, you've got the support from the franchisor, and the franchisor is going to provide you support, and already they have data. Unless that franchise model is totally new, then we'll regard it as a startup. But if it's an existing franchise, we don't regard it as a startup. And then to your further question where you're talking about, are you going to be penalized because of your other business was affected by COVID? No, you were not going to be penalized because of, that was beyond your control. The only thing, remember, as an entrepreneur, you are the jockey. If, let's say, for an example, during that COVID, maybe the business had some debts that are still due, maybe you've got judgments and so on. What we need to establish is whether you've made arrangements and are you making repayments? Because you'll find someone saying, I was affected by COVID, but last month they bought a Ferrari in their personal name. It doesn't make sense that you're saying, I was affected by COVID, but your personal lifestyle is still improving. So I think as long as you've made commitments to repay those debts, you should be fine to get funding. Thanks.
Panelists, any other responses to the questions?
Yeah, just with regards to whether or not we do business development support alongside the grant funding. So how it works is when you are funding ready, you can apply directly to the bank. It doesn't have to go through our business development service providers. So directly to the bank, you approach some of our enterprise bankers. They would be able to do an application with you. And then it goes to our funding committee. You get assessed and for eligibility to receive the grant funding that we have. So there's various fundings, as I've discussed, got the grant funding, we've got the purchase order funding, and we've also got corporate loans that we've partners with certain corporates. Outside of that, there are programs that we continuously run, which then addresses the issue of business development support. Most of you would have heard about our Wasadi development program, Western Cape Accelerator program. I know now we've got a call for application for tax innovation program, which looks at tax startup, so a tech entrepreneurial startup. I'm looking at my colleague there who's actually running it. But so there is a call for application. So for programs, we put them out on social media to say we are launching this program alongside that partner or that service provider, and this is the process of applying and what you need to qualify for. While you are part of that program, you are not restricted from applying from the grant funding component, which goes to our funding committee. So the gentleman at the back that mentioned that banks don't help, I think, I do see some of our beneficiaries, from the Basadi, some of the programs that we have, who have been assisted with cash injection from Standard Bank and also that business development support. So do try us, just look for enterprise and supply development for the various banks. Thank you.
Jed, I think,
just a disclaimer. So the SAB Foundation, we are not the enterprise development or the supplier development of SAB. So we fund across all the different sectors, right? So you should not feel like you cannot get support from us. So we do provide actually business development support as well as grant funding coupled together. And so you can always apply with us. Don't feel restricted.
Jed, I think you can take the last response.
Yeah, so I think just to the first person that asked the question, Ruby, congratulations. COVID was a very difficult time. It took out a lot of businesses. And I think an important characteristic of any entrepreneur is that of agility and the ability to pivot to a new opportunity. We at Sourcefin also had to pivot at a point. There was a constitutional court ruling which stopped the flow of purchase orders being awarded, which all of a sudden meant Sourcefin couldn't fund purchase orders. And it was at that point we introduced invoice discounting. So I suppose a valuable lesson from Ruby to the audience is if something isn't working, be aware of the opportunity to pivot, whether it's just outside what your current business model is, or even a leap into something new. It's always important to be aware of a new opportunity. Then to Peter, obviously it's hard for me to comment without looking at your specific deal. So I'd love to have a conversation with you after this. The reason I don't usually speak about how we charge is because we charge in a very different way. It's not a normal, straightforward interest charge. Remember, when it comes to a financial institution, when you apply for SMME funding, there's only one layer of risk that needs to be assessed. When it comes to purchase order funding, the risk that we're assessing on 4 different dimensions. We're assessing the risk of the SMME, we're assessing the risk of your clients, the end buyer, whether it's the department or state-owned enterprise. We are assessing the risk of the supplier that may deliver on that awarded purchase order, as well as the deal itself. So we need to incorporate all of those things into our risk assessment, which will eventually reveal a number that we charge. So as Saki spoke to a little bit earlier, our business model is usually we work on a profit share. So, we sort of split the profit. We target, and don't hold me to this because it might be different in your circumstance if you apply to Sourcefin. We target a 30-70, so 30% profit to Sourcefin, 70% profit to the SMME. But that's not the rule, right? So if your deal is much less risky, if you've got a good track record, if you're not a first-time client with Sourcefin, you might be charged a little bit less. But if it's a highly risky purchase order with a highly risky end buy, with a highly risky and highly complex deal, it might be a little bit more. Remember, we've got teams on the ground with you. So we've got deal management that are supporting you, project management that's supporting you to get the deal over the line. So we invest a lot of human resources into a project as well. It's not just the funding and the risk of the funding. But Peter, I'd love to have a conversation with you afterwards. And let's see, give me your company name, I'll have a look into it, and I can give you more specific information regarding your deal. We always try and make the deal work. And if the margin is too small initially, remember I spoke to our supply network. So we always try and send the RFQ to our supply network to see if we can extract higher cost savings, which would then increase the margin, which would allow us to go ahead with the deal. But I hope that answers your question and gives you the context around how we assess risk.
Thank you so much for those responses. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our panel discussion. But it doesn't bring us to the end of the work that we are here to do, which is to make sure that you as entrepreneurs, you as SMMEs, access funding and get an opportunity to collaborate with funders. As I highlighted earlier, we've got over 50 funders that are represented here today, and there's a funders pavilion on the 4th floor that you can interact with funders based on the information you heard here and based on other information that you might have heard. And much to the credit of our panelists today, they've even offered to have side discussions with you, because we appreciate that not all our questions were exhausted. But please give a warm round of applause to the panelists. And panelists, so that you don't leave empty-handed, Alu has got some non-financial incentives, non-financial assistance for you.
Non-financial assistance.
Thank you.
Panelists, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everything. Thank you for me. In closing this session, I would like to call on stage the group manager responsible for strategy, monitoring, and evaluation of the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, Ms. Nosipo Kongwane, to give her closing remarks. Thank you so much, Nosipo. A warm round of applause for Nosipo, please.
Thank you, Program Director. The special recognition to the Deputy Chairperson of the GEP Board, Mr. Phosane Mngabisa, CEO of GEP, also our esteemed representative from various funding institutions, and the valued SMMEs, whom without them this session would not have been a success. My name is Nosipo Kongwane. I'm the GM responsible for strategy at GEP. The Deputy Chairperson of GEP, in his opening remarks, indicated that this funding symposium was designed to connect SMMEs seeking financial support with a range of funding institutions based in this province of Gauteng. And then the CEO of GEP also mentioned that the goal that we wanted to address in this session is the ongoing credit gap that continues to challenge the SMMEs in South Africa. And he mentioned a figure of about $20 billion, which indicate that there is a significant shortfall that hinders the growth of small enterprises, despite the role that we know that they play in the economy, contributing about 40% of GDP. So we believe that as GEP and also the Department of Economic Development, I think this is the challenge that keeps us awake. And we believe that by fostering collaborations between funding institutions across both the public and private sector, we can create greater impact. So in today's symposium successfully brought together 20 funders under one roof, offering SMMEs a direct platform to engage and discuss their funding needs. So as we conclude this formal program, I just want to express on behalf of GEP our sincere gratitude firstly to the GEP chairperson for setting the tone for this event, and also indicating the appreciation of the challenges that are faced by SMMEs, and also offering some of the important interventions that are also required. And also our CEO as well offered some pearls of wisdom, which I think if there's anything not to forget about what has been said, is something what he said that about the do's and don'ts when approaching a funder. So I think as you are going to that networking session, you will remember what he said you should do when you're approaching a funder and what you shouldn't do, that you shouldn't be first greeting them and asking them what are they offering, but it's about you and the value proposition. And then also our panelists today, I think they deserve a round of applause. Your insight, experiences, and discussion have made this event truly meaningful. You have explored key funding challenges, uncovered innovative funding models from your various institutions. And also, I think what is important, we've all agreed and emphasized the importance of partnerships in strengthening financial sustainability of SMEs, as well as bridging the credit gap that exists in the country. To the SMMEs, we thank you for showing up. One of the well-known serial entrepreneurs, Richard Bryson, he says when he's offering some of the pearls of wisdom in starting and growing a business, besides finding your purpose, he says that you must also master the art of networking, which is about what is the next session now is all gonna be about. So now we will be transitioning into the networking sessions. So the SMMEs are encouraged to visit the exhibition area, which will be on the ground floor. At the center of the exhibition area, you'll find a funding symposium section. This is a section where you find all the funders, the ones that were here on stage, and all the others. As I said, we have about 20 funders around in that symposium. So you'll be able to network with those funders. So this is your opportunity to connect directly with them and continue the conversation. I know many of you wanted to speak, but you couldn't. But we know that the program director limited the time because he knew that you've got an extensive opportunity to still continue the conversation with the funders on one-on-one basis. So another important announcement is that when it's 1 o'clock, there will be lunch that will be served in this area where you had your breakfast, and the lunch will be served between 1 and 2. You will just have to come up for that. So once again, I thank you for being part of this event. We know that this is just a beginning, and we believe that by working together, all the funders in the room and SMMEs, we can drive the real change in the SMME ecosystem. Thank you very much for your participation.